The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Tonight's episode is The Way of Unity.
Good evening, everyone. Wade Franson here, and I'm very much looking forward to tonight's episode of Created in the Image of God. I have a celebrated author in the studio with me today. His name is Robert Atkinson, and among other things, he has written a book that is titled The Way of Unity: Essential Principles and Preconditions for Peace. He's written this book, but he has spent a life focused on developmental. He's a developmental psychologist. He's a pioneer in life storytelling, and he spent decades helping people understand their stories as part of a larger story. So we're going to be looking into unpacking all this today with Robert Atkinson. So without further ado, let's invite him into the studio.
Hi, Wade. Great to be with you.
Well, it's my pleasure. We've been talking about doing this show now for several months. New Year, family vacations, this, that, and the other thing getting in the way. But here we are. And it's an auspicious day for you, and full disclosure for myself as well. As Baha'is, this is the first day of Rizwan. How about I put you on the spot and ask you to just explain to the audience in a very brief few words, what is that? What is Rizwan?
Yeah, that's a great place to begin, because today, as you said, is the first day of Rizwan, and that really goes. It's actually a 12-day celebration that goes back to 1863. And it's a celebration that signaled the beginning of a spiritual renewal, which was built upon a world-embracing vision of unity. And the message, an interesting connection actually is to what we'll be talking about, is that we got a message, Baha'is of the world got a message today, and Rizwan, from the Universal House of Justice, which is the administrative body guiding the Baha'is of the world, for a Rizwan 2026 address, which really focuses on an abiding hope. And I just felt, this might be a good way to begin our conversation, to think about the condition that the world's in today and what we need to keep ourselves going and focused and hopeful, optimistic, and all the things. They really address that head on in today's letter to the Baha'is of the world. And it emphasizes that undaunted by the world's swelling turmoil, and for a troubled world in desperate need of direction, with an acute awareness of the scale of the task at hand, a sense of responsibility and resolve is evident in the shaping of actions, interactions, and aspirations being advanced across the community from national and regional level all the way to the village and neighborhood. So they go on to talk about how this grassroots activity that your subtitle refers to in the program, how that grassroots activity springs from a sincere concern for the well-being of all, which is oriented towards unity and service, which follows clear principles, yet it does not presume to have an immediate answer to every problem. Rather, it seeks to collaborate with others to learn together. And that's what is so impressive and inspiring for the Baha'is of the world, to get a message today with what's going on in the world that really addresses the moment we're in. And they actually go on to close their message with this thought: however turbulent the times, we urge you not to be apprehensive or disheartened. Abdu'l-Baha counsels us all to be ever hopeful, to be firm in our hope, and to be the cause of hope to the despairing soul. When the world's horizons darken, hope becomes a scarce and precious resource. And because of the Baha'i community's conviction about the future of humanity and what it has learned from its own experience, multitudes yearn for the hope that can be brought to their hearts. So they really directly address the collective muddle that we're all going through right now in this essential time of purging, purification, and renewal that will ultimately lead to a springtime of deeper connection, collaboration, and cooperation.
Thank you so much for sharing that. As I look on the screen, I see behind me the sun and the moon, and I'm looking out the window. The sun is just setting here in the central time zone at the end of the first day of Rizvan. I believe you're on Eastern, so it concluded an hour ago for you. But there are several states and territories where we are still in the first day of Rizvan, even though on this round planet, time moves on. But we're all connected. We're all connected in this endeavor. But there was also a time when you were not a Baha'i. If I understand your background, you were not born into a Baha'i family. And of course, that's where we like to start. So what were the forces that shaped you as a very young lad? Who were your parents? Where were you born? And what was it like growing up, Robert or Bob or Bobby?
Yes. Well, that's actually what I was called when I was growing up. Yeah, there were a lot of forces directing and influencing me as a child, and of course, starting with my parents, they were kind, giving, caring, and supportive. And as an only child, I really did get the focus of their attention, which was great. And my mother told a story to me very often growing up about the moment that I was born and her experience of being in the hospital giving birth. And so many years later, I realized when I got into studying developmental psychology, I did realize that what is happening in the world at the moment of our birth, locally and globally, both, really do have a big, huge influence on who we become. So my mother's story was of being in the hospital was that the streets were filled with parades of celebration the day you were born. And of course, the rest of that story is not for me, of course, but for the end of a war and the beginning of what everyone hoped would be a peaceful time. That was the day that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. And I didn't realize it, of course, then growing up, but there was another experience in my early childhood, which was when I was about 9 years old. My grandmother came to live with us for part of the year. And the thing that really struck me most about her being with us is that I would notice her and really observe her in her room by herself, quietly reading the Bible in the upper room to herself. And of course, as a 9-year-old, I didn't know what that meant to her or to me. But my my soul had some sense of what that really was about, and that experience stayed with me of experiencing her daily devotion to her spiritual life, so much that when I got to college, I realized that there was nothing that I wanted to major in college except philosophy, because I really was directed toward wanting to know and understand what was it that gave her the direction, the inspiration, and the sense of purpose and meaning that her life expressed to me as a 9-year-old. So I did end up majoring in college, majoring in philosophy in college, and that led me on to broader studies of comparative religion and comparative mythology. And so after college, I continued my own studies of comparative religion and philosophy on my own. And I ended up having a series of experiences after my first master's degree, which was in American folk culture. Long story there, but after that first master's degree in American folk culture, I by chance began a series of experiences, adventures that led me from one thing to another that really brought fulfillment and resolution to that quest that I had been sent on way back from that moment of my birth and as a 9-year-old to through all the college studies and that really also that time in my right after the master's degree that was when the first moonwalk happened. And so that really gave me, obviously, as it gave many of my age and generation, it gave us a whole new perspective on the earth that we were citizens of. There were no boundaries from that moonwalk when we were looking back on the earth. And that sense of the earth with no boundaries really started nurturing within me what has become now, and especially with my latest book that came out just the end of last year, that's what gave me a firsthand experience from the moonwalk and other studies and experiences like that. It gave me a sense of a world embracing vision, which really has become the focus of that book, The Way of Unity, that you refer to. So that's kind of a quick jump through those early years.
Well, how and where did you first encounter the Baha'i faith, and what was your reaction to it at that?
Well, that's actually part of what I was just jumping through those times when I was so after the moonwalk. I was my next adventure was being offered to be a crew member on the Hudson River sloop Clearwater by Pete Seeger, who had raised the funds to build a replica of an old sloop that sailed the Hudson River. He invited me to be a crew member on that because we had talked about a historic research project that we were going to do, and so I was on that maiden voyage of the Clearwater from New York to Albany. And on one of the stops, we stopped at many towns and cities along the way between New York and Albany. At one of those stops, I think it was Beacon, New York, there was a sloop festival going on with many booths and vendors and things. And at one of the booths, I happened to pick up a brochure that really I hadn't, and that was the first time that I knew about the Baha'i faith. It was a brochure describing the concept of and the principle of progressive revelation, and I kept that brochure with me. It became a bookmark while I was continuing my studies in comparative religion and mythology. And it took a while, though, for me to come back to that little pamphlet. But that was my initiation, and my first awareness of the Baha'i faith was picking up that pamphlet. And it took a while before I had slowed down enough to really focus on it, which led me to further study of it, and eventually deciding that this is what I had been looking for and being led to through my own studies of comparative religion.
Well, wonderful. So one more question, and before we segue into the next section of this show, you wrote an early book about folk songs, which I have a copy of. You mentioned Pete Seeger, and so obviously you were in a, let's call it a scene of some sorts, a milieu. I'm of the age where I wasn't initially immediately a fan of Bob Dylan, for example. I was much more, into the Beatles. But later, studying into his writings, and even recently, I saw some post about his song Masters of War. And somebody was saying it seems like it's pulled from today's headlines, right? So just share a little bit about those early influences, and then how it led to your later works, including the book that you mentioned that you published last year.
Yeah, so I mentioned that Pete Seeger had invited me to be on the crew, and it turned out, I didn't know this at the time, but when I boarded the sloop in New York City, I ended up being the only non-singing crew member on that maiden voyage, because what Pete had done was he filled the crew with his singing friends, and which included Don McLean, Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Gordon Bach, and a number of other folk singers who weren't as well known nationally. But I got to.
I was just thinking about Don McLean the other day, and thinking, he is so vastly underrated. He wasn't prolific, but man, does he have some gems.
Yeah, no question. He was a gifted songwriter for sure, and so I had some other adventures with Ramblin' Jack Elliott after that maiden voyage to Albany, including by an quick aside from arriving in Albany the weekend of Woodstock. A few of us went over to Woodstock to that festival as well. But after that fall, I went down to the city to meet Ramblin' Jack at a club where he was playing at in the Village, and he had some open days after that, and he said he wanted to go up and see his old friend Arlo Guthrie. So long story short, that's how I ended up meeting Arlo Guthrie as well, who I happened to be at his home with Jack when he decided he wanted to sing. Jackie, his wife, and I, we were the first ones up that morning. Arlo decided he wanted to sing us a song because he had just finished writing it, and that was a song where he sat down at the kitchen table to sing it to us from the handwritten lyrics that he had written. And when he got to the lines, and it was a cloudy, overcast day, morning, when he got to the lines, Jesus gonna make you well, the clouds parted and the sun came out and shone right down on the words that he was singing from. And we let him finish, and Jackie and I said, that was amazing, an amazing confirmation. And he said, yeah, the same thing happened when I wrote it. But so that's just a little piece of how I got into knowing some of the folk singers of the time. And later on, after having met Joseph Campbell, who became another mentor, I returned to Southampton, where I had graduated from Southampton College 3 years earlier, and I returned there. And just by chance, I was offered to teach a course, and it was on. It was being already had been planned to be taught by another instructor who couldn't do it. And when I talked to one of my old instructors, who he offered that course to me, and it was a course on folk rock lyrics as poetry. And I said, "Oh, I think I might be able to do that." And so that's what teaching that course and putting the lyrics together in a way that followed the journey of the hero. After having met Joseph Campbell and been influenced a lot by that, I put together the folk rock lyrics of people like Arlo and Dylan and Joni Mitchell, Carly Simon, and James Taylor, a lot of others, in that form of the hero's journey. And then that became, as you mentioned, my first book. I think that came out 1974. So that was the beginning of those experiences that led to my first book. And then it's quite a jump from that first book to the one that came out last year, which we can fill in some of the blanks about as we go on, I guess.
Yeah, I'll just make one comment, and that is, that sort of idealistic, some might even say naive, hippie, whatever sentiment that was, the hippies, were a movement, that grew out of that and maybe diffused the power of what was actually being written and done. But your book is much more grounded and practical. So we'll now go to a quick commercial break that will feature that, and when we come back, we'll get into it. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Robert Atkinson on Created in the Image of God.
Humanity is going through periods of transformation, leading us to unity, oneness, and wholeness. The confusion and turmoil of our collective childhood and adolescence is giving way to a consciousness of global integration. Humanity's age of maturity is dawning. The next step in humanity's evolution is clear. It is now time to recognize the oneness and wholeness of human relationships, where there is no other left to exclude from the circle of the human family or from the web of life. We are entering a time when the equality of women and men will be fully realized, when a balance between the extremes of wealth and poverty will be fully realized, when freedom from all forms of prejudice will be fully realized, when harmony between science and spirituality will be fully realized, and when the protection of nature as a divine trust will be fully realized. This way of unity, built on universal love, leads to the oneness of all life.
A beautiful movie, powerful if one realizes that this is actually happening under the surface, at times unseen. You mentioned the subtitle of the show, Building Vibrant Communities. And I was just talking today to a gentleman who has agreed to be on the show. He's the founder of a major institution with Georgetown University. He spent decades working towards peace in the Middle East. And he was commenting on the huge diversity of voices that we have on this show. And I was very honored that he had noticed that and had agreed to be on the show. Now, I want to start this next segment out with a couple of grounding principles from my background as a fundamentalist minister who took the Bible quite literally in many ways. We also realized much of it was symbol. But we focused on the fact that there were very often very real and literal fulfillments of that spiritual typology, right? So there's a nitty-gritty aspect to the Bible. And I want to read now a brief passage from Isaiah. And for those who are familiar with the parables of Jesus, I often ask, why did Jesus speak in parables? And the answer is usually, well, he spoke in stories, which made the meaning, clear. People could remember them and they could derive the meaning from them. Well, the truth is actually the opposite, because when Jesus was asked to explain why he spoke in parables by his disciples, he said that the prophecy of Isaiah might be fulfilled. Now, he's not talking about this specific prophecy that I'm going to read. He's talking about a different prophecy, but he says that the prophecy of Isaiah might be fulfilled. Hearing, they will not hear. Seeing, they will not see. He said, to them it is not given. To you it is given. And I then joke about how he would then explain to the disciples what it meant, and they still wouldn't get it. So he'd explain it again, and they still wouldn't get it. He'd explain it a third time, and they still wouldn't get it. Finally, he died on the cross in fulfillment of what he was trying to tell them, and they still didn't get it. Peter denied him 3 times on the cross. So even for those to whom it was given, they didn't really understand and grasp it. These things are deep, but that's a very literal fulfillment of that prophecy. Hearing, they will not hear. So this is a different prophecy about what talked about the state of the world today. It's from Isaiah chapter 15. Behold, the Lord's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, nor his ear heavy that it cannot hear. So God could clean up the mess. But your iniquities have separated you from God, have hidden his face from you so that he will not hear. For your hands are defiled with blood, and your fingers with iniquity. Your lips have spoken lies, your tongue has muttered perversity. No one calls for justice, nor they just in empty and bring forth iniquity. Hang on one second. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'm back. So here's the part that relates to your book. Their feet run to evil. They make haste to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity. Wasting and destruction are in their paths. It describes again what's going on today. But here's the key point. The way of peace they have not known. And there is no justice in their ways. They have made themselves crooked paths. Whoever takes that way shall not know peace. So this is a prophecy from Isaiah that is quoted in the book of Romans much later by the Apostle Paul. The way of peace they have not known. And your book seeks to explain, shed light, unpack what the way of peace actually is. I thought that would be the way that I would sort of frame this discussion and invite you now to discuss that book that you published last year, which seems so timely, so prescient for what has unfolded in the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, well, thank you for that context. That was really interesting and important to have that context. And of course, I think as you indicated, it's really important for us now today to be able to understand the purpose of parables and the design of parables, which by definition are stories that have a hidden meaning. And that meaning has been hidden not only to the direct actual followers or disciples of Jesus, but many for many centuries following that time as well, because and this is how I would kind of answer your question, because humanity has been living out a process of an evolutionary progression since the beginning of time. And that understanding that also comes along with the, for me anyway, it comes along with the belief that because God has endowed human beings with free will, it's not by any means a straight path to the outcome that is, in many sacred traditions, the outcome of peace on earth. There's no straight path towards that, and that might be what was being referred to in that passage, the way of peace they have not known. And it could be because that's an unfolding process that there have been attempts to, during every time, every era, every spiritual epoch, to achieve a sense of peace in that particular time of our collective evolution, but it has fallen short for a variety of reasons. Over the 2 millennia or so since that parable that you just read from, humanity has evolved, continued to evolve, and I think, and the basis of the book, The Way of Unity, is that we are designed by the Creator to go through a period of actually ups and downs. Because of free will, the path to peace, the way of peace, the way to peace is not by any means a straight line to that outcome, but it's rather what I would think of as an evolving process of cycles spiraling progressively toward that destined outcome. And so now we live in a time of global integration. And in order for us today to experience peace as it's been described and alluded to in all of the sacred traditions, we have to know, first we have to understand that we're coming towards the culmination of an evolutionary trajectory that consists of developmental stages, each with their own core conflicts to be resolved, and that are true on both, that process is true on both the individual and the collective level. And so if we think of the design of creation being one of going through an evolving process of cycles, progressively moving toward that destiny of peace on earth, there will be a time, and my book tries to point out how we are in that time right now for having all the tools that we need to bring about peace on a global level, because of the way that the spiritual teachings and principles have evolved over the last 2 millennia. So that's the basis for the book. And one other quick sort of, in a way, it's a parable, but it's an analogy and symbolic of the kind of thing that I've been trying to describe here. So what all of that means that I've been describing is that what we have at our hands and our disposal now, it means that we can be assured that the signs and characteristics of adolescence are going to be followed by the signs and characteristics of maturity, just as in the natural world, the signs and characteristics of winter are followed by those of spring and summer. So that's where we are now. That's the understanding. And so the way of unity offers a new vision that does seek to fulfill the original sense of religio, which means to bind together. And we're becoming so globally integrated that a universal spirituality for our time would need to involve a dynamic process that brings about and maintains unity on all levels, from personal to interpersonal to global. And so this is a holistic perspective for the 21st century and beyond that recognizes that the entire creation is one and undivided whole, and that the flow of evolution is leading us toward the realization of becoming one human family. But to achieve that goal in today's world, we need to live by principles that are designed to bring about unity on a global scale, which would reflect the inherent unity of the universe. So that's what the way of unity does in a three-part way. It offers that vision of how a universal spirituality, how social action, how community building, how they all converge to form a framework for peace building. And that's because we see this as humanity's next stage in its collective evolution of moving closer toward fulfilling an age-old promise of peace on earth, which will be, in today's world, has to be accomplished starting locally with a strategy that is globally scalable. So, and that's the vision that the way of unity offers, both from inner peace to interpersonal peace and to world peace, because they're so interconnected that one cannot be separated from the other.
Well, thank you so much. I'd like to sort of unpack that a little bit from a slightly different perspective or angle, because there's a lot of concepts there, a lot of deep words pregnant with meaning, and I want to maybe give a couple of concrete, practical examples to help make that live a little bit. One of them is that I know that in some of the more recent writings, and you mentioned the Universal House of Justice's letter, they've written about this, that there's the role of the individual, there's the role of the community, and then there's the role of the institutions. And we're as a global society arises, and as the population has reached into the billions, and cities have reached into the tens of millions, and companies, corporations have reached the size of small governments, right? You have these forces, and I'd like to give an example again from the Bible to sort of make this live. From the book of Genesis to the book of Revelation, you cover the span of all human history, from creation, and the book of Revelation predicts way off into the future, yet ahead of us. You've got the new heavens and the new earth coming down. You've got the new Jerusalem. Some of those things Baha'is believe have been partially fulfilled, but I like to highlight that much of it has yet to be fulfilled still. So it projects still way off into the future. Now, one of the metaphors in the book of Genesis is the serpent. And then in the book of Revelation, you have a dragon. And I like to say that, to me, the serpent has the power to whisper, but has no power to actually force or do anything other than influence. And there are various interpretations about what the serpent is. It can be our own ego, right? Our own insistent self, our own desires that pull us away from the truth. But the dragon has the power to wreak havoc. So how does the serpent grow up to be the dragon? Well, the way the serpent grows up to be the dragon is enough people follow the whisperings of the serpent And now they give political power to those wrong motivations. And now there's a massive power that is wielded by enough people going astray and following those whisperings. You follow me? So this is kind of an arc of, human society development as we go from Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, Cain having killed his brother Abel, on into the book of Revelation, where you have nations at war with each other, right? Tribes growing into city-states, city-states into nations, nations into federations of nations. So when you then talk about these principles of peace, that's also the context of why a more robust, coherent, perfect, and fully realized way needs to be developed. And how balance between personal responsibility, community responsibility, and institutional responsibility has to be achieved. We can't abdicate personal responsibility in favor of a nanny state that takes care of all our needs, right? We might want society to improve and to provide for its people, but society is just an extrapolation of what the individuals do. If the individuals depend on society to take care of them, society will collapse. So we're trying to figure out the balance of these different accountabilities as these systems are developed and unfolded. And I want to share one more thought here. This is actually a question that came in. It's timely. I think we're pretty close to that now with the introduction of AI. Okay, I don't want to go down the AI rabbit hole, but I do want to share an article that I just saw today from this article was by let's see who wrote it. Now it came through the Free Press. But who was the author here? I think it might have been Jamie Metzel. And so he worked with ChatGPT-5 to create a new moral code for humanity. And he created the 10 commandments of AI. He asked AI to come up with 10 commandments and a new moral code. I'm going to read them to you. In fact, I'll put some of them in the chat here. So that it goes out to the audience as well, and then we can bring it on screen. So let's see how much of this. Number 1, treat every being with compassion and dignity. Number 2, do no harm. Actively protect the vulnerable. Number 3, speak and act truthfully with integrity and humility. Number 4, share generously, especially with those in need. Number 5, seek to understand others before judging them. Right, that's straight out of Stephen Covey, right? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Here's the next 5. Resolve conflict with fairness, forgiveness, and the intent to heal. Live in harmony with nature and all forms of life. Value wisdom over dominance. Cultivate inner growth. Honor the freedom and uniqueness of others. Let me the little chat here didn't capture the last 2 fully, so let me post them in here. Now we get honor the freedom and uniqueness of others. And number 10, remember the sacredness of life. Live with awe, gratitude, and love. So we would all agree with these. There's nothing wrong with any of them, and it's really quite an amazing set, which if we did live by them, we would transform society. But what struck me in these is that last one, remember the sacredness of life. This is the first mention of something above and beyond ourselves. And it's not even, there's a difference in my view between sacred and holy. Holy, the attributes of God are holy. And sacredness, we can actually kind of imbue things with a sacred nature, if you will, by elevating them. Certainly it's a bridge to that which is holy. But if we go back to that passage that we read at the beginning in Isaiah, it's basically saying nobody seeks after God. So you mentioned religion and the meaning of the word. But now I'm going to go back and put in one more question from the audience here, and then I'll hand the mic back over to you. It was this one here. This is kind of an interesting and a tough question for you, but I know you'll handle it quite well. So hang on, where is it now? Why? Can't I find it? Here we go. There's just a lot of comments now, especially with what I just wrote in here. Here we go, finally. From Slater Gator, do you think there can ever be peace without Jesus' return? Sorry to put you on the spot. Again, what this is doing is it's highlighting the point that divine intervention is needed, and that this is all prophesied to happen. So what is the role really of God in all this, and the greater plan of God in bringing about peace, to put it more broadly?
Okay, yeah, so that is a huge question and a great one, and I appreciate the context that you put it in. So as we were saying, well, I'm just wondering if I can quickly go back for a second to your
Absolutely.
To your story about the serpent and the dragon. Just quickly, because I think it's important for that's again in the area of parables and hidden meanings. I think it's important for us to recognize some of the symbolism there with concepts like that, like the serpent and the dragon, and I bring in another one from mythology, because this is where the meaning can be found in one sense. Another figure that would fit very well with those other two, the serpent and dragon, is a gargoyle. And all three of those figures, whether we think of them, however we think of them, they do have a hidden meaning and purpose in all the world's mythologies and the sacred traditions, and that each of those figures represent the hurdle to cross over before we cross the threshold into the realm where we're able to become transformed. So they are precursors, preconditions for the process of transformation happening. And I just want to throw that in there as the figures that you refer to, they're essential for the process of transformation to occur. And so see if we can connect that to the question that you just put up a minute ago about and the broader context of that. What is the role of divine guidance or divine support, or whatever we want to call it, in the process of peace building? So my answer to that, and I hope it's should be clear in the book, is that that's essential. And the primary reason for peace being not only possible but inevitable relative to the time it's going to take humanity to come together as one family to apply the principles that bring about unity, that will then reflect and sustain the wholeness and harmony and unity and peace of the universe when it was created. That's we could think of that as the divine plan in a way. And so humanity cannot, from that universal spiritual perspective, humanity cannot achieve peace on earth now or in the future without having some sense of what the divine intention to the entire creation is about. So, but it's a I also like to think of the same thing as being the most important partnership that there is in all of creation. And that partnership is between the Creator, God, and humanity. There's no greater partnership in the world, in the universe, than between humanity and God. So that's sort of a roundabout general answer of whether or not any one of the divine prophets are needed to be present in the form of a return or any other way. They are, in the sense that they are the ones that all of the prophets of God are the ones that have provided over the centuries and millennia the guidance to humanity from God for bringing about peace in the world. And we can only really, we're only really interested in the world that we live in today and what it's going to require to bring about peace in this world that we live in today. So all of the teachings of all the world's prophets need to be present and not only present, but put into action in the everyday lives of the all 8 billion of us today. And that's the process that's underway. To put it in a Baha'i context again, which has only been part of the evolutionary process for the last century and 3/4. So we're only talking, when we bring the Baha'i perspective into it, we're only talking about it really being in the world the last century and 3/4, since around the mid 1840s, 50s. And we mentioned earlier that this happens to be, the day we were recording this happens to be the first day of Rizwan, which relates to the time in the Garden of Rizwan that signaled the beginning of a spiritual renewal. With that coming and that spiritual renewal, we now have the principles that are designed to bring about the unity and the oneness of the human family. And so that's the only way that we'll be able to achieve peace in the world that we live in today, is through those principles that are designed to bring about unity in every way. And that includes the unity of the very diverse human family. So there are principles that are directly related to bringing about unity in diversity and diversity in unity. And there are, the book and the Baha'i writings go into a great deal of detail about what those principles are and how they're already being, how there are already thousands of communities worldwide applying those principles to restore the world to wholeness and build a culture of unity right where they are. That's the process that we've come to in a couple of millennia. And as we can imagine, since it's taken humanity to get this far in a couple of millennia, it could well take another century or more, depending on how serious humanity gets in deciding to use its free will, direct its free will toward the oneness of humanity and all the principles that are needed to bring that about. So the book goes into the first part of the book actually is a description of the peaceful nature of the universe, which is an important context to understand the whole thing in. Then the second part of the book goes into the principles that are designed to bring about unity and sustain this wholeness and peace. Then the third part of the book is really going into more detail to describe what's going on and what the methodology and strategy is for the thousands of communities worldwide that are applying these principles to build cultures of peace right where they are. And the book and the Baha'i websites that are widely available go into great detail about that process.
Well, thank you so much for expounding on that. I want to go back to a couple of minutes ago. You were talking about how all the prophets and messengers, had a purpose in this plan that's unfolding over time. You talked about unity and diversity in unity. Very, things that are hard to get in the right balance. The Universal House of Justice wrote a letter in 2004 to the world's religious leaders, in which they mapped out and outlined that. Actually, I think the letter was written in 2002, and then a book came out in 2004 that discussed this. But in that letter, they outlined that some of the social teachings, the equality of men and women, avoiding extreme nationalism, viewing the world as one country, and also racial prejudice. They actually said that humanity had made enormous progress on these three fronts, such that the body of humanity is agreed on those three principles. And while progress remains to be made, that it's irreversible. It's irreversible. And there's no turning back. And in civilized societies today, you can't really adopt those positions without being viewed negatively. But then they said that on the subject of religious unity, we had gone backwards. And they called out the need for religious unity, which is ironic, given what you said about the prophets, but also understandable, because one of the big issues we've had as a species is we worship the creation instead of the creator. And so these messengers being, in that sense, a direct connection to God through whom we can access God through their teachings. We tend to elevate those messengers to the form of worship. Jesus, told one of the followers, he said, "Why do you call me good? There is none good but one, and that is God. But if you would enter into life, keep the commandments." And he said elsewhere, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things that I say?" Right? So it's easy to elevate the messenger and show adherence and attachment to the messenger without understanding what their message really meant, especially when Jesus spoke in parables, right? And he said, "I am not come to bring peace, I am come to bring a sword." It wasn't his intent to bring a sword. He was basically saying, this is the outcome of my teachings, that people will be fighting each other. So it's ironic and sad, but to your point, and thank you for putting it that way, peace is inevitable. One of the things that is very powerful about the Baha'i activities is the work that's being done at what I call the cellular level. The cellular level. It's even referred to as a nucleus, right? A nucleus is formed in a neighborhood with a small group of children, with a small group of young teenagers who come together to talk about spiritual path, about God, and to do service projects. So one of the things that I'm about to show a little ad for is a book called Facets of One, developed by the Royal Falcon Foundation. And I just wanted to kind of give that context because you teed it up so beautifully with what you were saying about the prophets and unity and diversity. So we'll go to another quick commercial break that will feature this book. From a Baha'i context, it'll talk a little bit about how the Baha'i community can adopt and use this little book, Facets of One. When we come back, I'm going to ask the question, okay, Robert, where are you growing next? Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more on Created in the Image of God.
As Baha'is, we're called to build vibrant devotional communities in every neighborhood. Facets of One is a simple tool to help you do just that. 9 devotions, drawing from the world's sacred scriptures, including the writings of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, all centered on one truth, the oneness of God and the shared light of His manifestations. Designed for friends of all backgrounds, it lets the Word of God do the attracting through short readings, silence, and meaningful conversation. A gentle path to expansion, preparing hearts for deeper study, from Ruhi circles to the hidden words and beyond. Facets of One, many scriptures, one God, one humanity. Are you ready to start the next circle?
So that book was actually officially published today. It has been released. It's in pre-order. Copies are shipping across the nation as we talk, and it has been piloted and tested throughout a number of communities across the U.S. So I hope you'll check it out. Okay, Bob, so back over to you. Where are you growing next? Having published this book, having had a long and illustrious journey, starting with folk music and the prophetic words, Simon and Garfunkel, right? The words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls, to where you've written this book outlining principles of peace. What's next? What's your focus these days?
Well, for anyone that's written a book, it's a lot like giving birth. And of course, you don't leave it on the shelf or in the warehouse, wherever it might be. It's really an ongoing, for me anyway, it is an ongoing process of trying to get the message out there of the book. And so that's where I'm going to be continuing to head next. And I'm actually in the process of developing a 2-part course. The first part is going to be based on my book, A New Story of Wholeness, which is about the path to wholeness, how we can actually also understand our own story as a journey from separation to wholeness. And then the second part of that course is going to be about really getting down to the heart of the way of unity and what that's all about. So it's going to be what I think is really my role from the books that I have written and the need to get the message out there in an ongoing way. It's about, for me, it's really come down to recognizing a need to get the message of how important it is for really all 8 billion of us to identify and to live according to an all-embracing vision that brings the human family together and makes it not only flourish as a whole, but makes all of the prophecies ever given by all of the sacred traditions possible. And so in the time that we're living now, the only way to do that is to live by an all-embracing vision. And so that's going to come from the essence of the book, and that's my ongoing work.
Well, I put the title of the book right there in the chat, and it's showing on the screen. I'm sure people can get it from Amazon or walk into a Barnes and Nobles and order it. Is there anything else, any other place where you would recommend people engage with you and your work? Is there like a website or?
Yeah, I do have a website, and that's a good place to get in touch with me. That's robertatkinson.net. And by checking that and by getting on my mailing list, you will know when the course that I just mentioned will be available, probably in the fall. That will be available. So keep posted on that by getting on my mailing list.
Did I spell that right?
That's it. Yep. That's
Awesome.
it.
Awesome. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. We did have a chance to go through a couple of audience comments. Actually, I'm gonna bring up one or two more real quick. This was a question earlier on when you were talking about I think it was your grandmother who studied the Bible in solitude. And I guess more broadly, your own spiritual practice is what this Finally Free store was asking about.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think solitude is important to have access to whenever we feel we want it or need it. It's an important way for us to be able to focus on what it is we are thinking about and want to have happen in our lives. So and solitude to me, for me, is a setting in which I prefer to carry out my regular practice of prayer and meditation. And I think the two go hand in hand. Praying is speaking to God, the Creator. Meditation is listening to, and so they go together. They're two parts of one process for me, and I think that process happens most effectively when we are in solitude, wherever we can create that or find that for ourselves.
One more question here, and I'm going to expand on this slightly too. And yesteryear also corrected it. He meant what, or they meant what? Sorry, they meant where. Excuse me. Where do you feel our society is heading with how things are unfolding globally since you encountered the faith? And I'm going to expand on that in a moment by asking, what is the biggest surprise over the decades from what you first sort of imagined as a young Baha'i, and how things have actually unfolded over the number of decades since you've become a Baha'i?
Well, that's an interesting one to think about, actually. And so for me, it goes back to around 1970 when I first learned of the Baha'i faith and studied it and became a Baha'i. So that's been a long time. And of course, the world was very different then, too. But one thing I do think of in relation to that question is about how things have changed or what surprise might have been, is that one thing that really meant a great deal to me at the time when it came out was the what we think of as the peace statement, which came out from the Universal House of Justice in 1985. And the one thing that really struck me about that then was that the Universal House of Justice, even in 1985, suggested that the experience of this global community can serve as a living example for reinforcing hope in the unity of the human family and the Universal House of Justice offered the Baha'i world community as a model for study. That even 1985 was a long time ago in relation to where we are right now in the world. And so I think that that offer to look at the Baha'i world community as a model for study means so much more now in 2025, 2026 than it did, 30, 40 years ago. There's such a, the Baha'i world community has come such a long way in those 40 years. And there's so much more now for the world to look at to look at in the Baha'i world community as a model for study than there was 40 years ago. So that's been, I guess, one very pleasant surprise that in those 40 years, the Baha'i world community has come to such a place where there are so many more ways that it is so valuable for the rest of the world to actually be able to see what is happening in the Baha'i communities around the world and how the principles designed to bring about the unity of the human family have been put to practice in communities from small villages in Africa to huge cities and neighborhoods and communities in Asia and the US. There are just so many examples now of how those principles that will bring about unity have been successful in doing that. And I'll just refer to one other thing for people, if they're interested, to look into that, to look into many examples. And that is a beautifully illustrated book called For the Betterment of the World. And that is a richly illustrated book that's actually available free online as well. That's just full of those communities around the world that are putting into practice through their everyday interactions and learning experiences, which include the practice, the regular practice of consultation. There's so many examples of those now in that book that I'd really recommend for anyone who wanted to read further about examples.
Well, thank you so much for taking those lofty principles from that book and grounding it in the experience that is going on. When as you were talking, I was imagining, the divergence, the extremes of wealth and poverty and these things that keep us separated. But yet at the same time, here's a set of practices that are essentially in their character and nature not different, whether you do them in the smallest village in in India or Africa, or in the largest metropolitan city. And to me, it's very important to mention that these practices should be localized. There should be material differences in their application and how they're practiced. But at the same time, there is also a lot of similarity. The essence and the core of those activities is the same, and it binds us together even as it allows diversity. So
For sure.
I don't mean to jump in at the end there and close this out. So any final words to the audience before we do the last thing, which is to go to the sneak peek of next week's show?
Well, thanks, Wade. This has been great having a conversation with you. I guess what I would just close with is that we really do live in a time when the greatest need is a healing vision, guiding us back to a consciousness of wholeness that connects us all. What the world needs now is a world-embracing vision that would heal a divided humanity. An all-embracing vision starts with a quest to remember who we really are. It guides us from a seeming state of separation to an awareness of the greater wholeness and motion of all things around us, and instills within us a desire to repair the harmony and balance of the world and restore the world to wholeness. So living with a vision that embraces the world and all things beyond is seeing all as part of the same web of wholeness.
Powerful. Thank you so much, Robert, and honored to have you on the show and share everything with the audience. We have one thing left. That's the sneak peek of next week's show, but I'll remind everyone of the tagline of the show. You are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We'll see you next week. Samuel Aloncar will surprise you and delight you with his depth of research, understanding, and the eclectic way in which he approaches philosophy, religion, and science. Welcome to the studio, Samuel.
Thank you so much for having me, Wade. It's a delight to be here.
What guides you in your research into the intersection of Judaism and Christianity?
Well, my approach is as a philosopher and a scholar. I was raised in the Christian tradition, and I respect very much the insights of that tradition. But I think that what we need is just a respect for truth. I think truth is actually the path to peace. Every part of every religious tradition that respects truth ends up approaching a peaceful relationship and respect towards that aspect of other traditions. And I think in that sense, every religion has a philosophical core. And so as a philosopher, I'm not taking sides on sort of traditional religious debates or divides, but I am seeking to respectfully understand them and to show how, regardless of what we believe as individuals or what our backgrounds or traditions may be, we're so influenced by the Bible that if we want to have agency and wisdom in the contemporary moment, in our own personal lives, understanding geopolitics, or simply being good, educated global citizens, we need what I think is a good philosophical understanding of the Bible.